Hello Orchid friends, welcome back to my channel. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day, staying healthy and staying safe. Today, here we have my Phalaenopsis fly eagle Wilson. This is a cross between Tetraspis C1 as the pot parent and Dragon Tree Eagle as the pollen parent. And because Tetraspis C1 has this really interesting capability of giving you flowers with different kinds of random color distribution on the flowers, so this orchid also has a little bit of that. My particular orchid, the color variation comes in the top left and top right petals. I have seen other people's fly eagle Wilson having, yellow sepals, but my fly eagle Wilson, this particular orchid, the sepals, the one at the top, the bottom left, bottom right, they're always in this dark red color, and it's really the petals are sometimes a little more yellow, sometimes a little more red, but this time around I actually have a almost red flower, so that's the first time. And this orchid is also really fragrant. It has a little bit of that powder sweetness of fragrance from Tetraspis C1, but it's more sweet. It's sweeter than that. So I think Dragon Tree Eagle also contributes the fragrance, contributes to its fragrance. This orchid is indeed a sequential bloomer as well, and typically this orchid would retire its entire flower spike after 1 year, but during this 1 year bloom cycle, honestly I try to keep track of when this orchid would bloom, but because it could bloom 2 to 3 times a year randomly, and I say randomly on a purpose because to me this orchid in my environment anyway is almost free flowering. It's like when it wants to flower, it flowers. There isn't really a orchid would put out blooms, and to me that's a big plus, because sometimes when I'm not expecting this orchid to bloom and all of a sudden it's in buds, so it's always a nice surprise when it happens. I currently grow this orchid in a plastic container. It's a 24-ounce plastic container. It's quite large. It's actually the largest container I'm using for my orchids. Most of my orchids are in 16-ounce cups. Some are in 12-ounce, and even fewer are in, say, 8-ounce cups. But this orchid, the reason I gave this orchid a bigger container was because of its root system. And this orchid has been in this container for quite some time, and because it has been doing so well, so I just didn't feel the need to take it out of the container just to see what's inside, right? When it's not broken, you don't fix it. But after a few years though, you do see that this orchid has a lot of aerial roots. And that's typical, because when you have an established orchid for a few years in the same container, chances are good that you're going to have more aerial roots than you would want, because when you're moving the orchid, I mean, sure, aerial roots, root porn, it's just, interesting to look at. I personally love looking at orchid roots. However, when it get beyond a certain point, those roots, even though they still look nice, the handling, or when you're moving the orchid, is just not very practical, not very convenient. So every few years, for my established orchids with lots of aerial roots, I would always use the repop opportunity to put those aerial roots back into the medium, back into the container. And I believe because an orchid has more roots in the container, it would have more opportunity to absorb water and nutrients, and hence would do better. And that's why I feel the need to do that. And plus, without having that much aerial roots dangling around, it's just much easier for me to maintain this orchid as well as the orchids around it when I need to move them, fertilize them, clean them, etc., etc. Now, currently this orchid is still in a semi-hydro setup, and it always loves it. It has never had any issues with it. It gives me blooms every year, and semi-hydro is a very interesting method. But I became interested and curious about how this orchid would do in a different setup. So what I have decided is, after these flowers are finished, I would repot this orchid and try to give it a different growing method. The bottom leaf was slowly yellowing out, no problem, natural, it's completely natural. Orchids do shed their older leaves. As long as the yellowing isn't too fast, you don't have to worry about orchids, being sick or having root rot issues. So I finally decided to repot this orchid, and I only had to trim off a few dead root tissue, and for the most part, this root still has a relatively okay root system inside the medium, but because it has so many area roots, I wasn't really worried about the overall well-being of the orchid. I knew it would have enough roots to continue to thrive. So here is the photo of orchid roots being, cleaned. And then I put this orchid back into the original container with the same kind of pebbles, and it's a mixture of manto clay, the small pebbles, and then the bigger pebble is coal hydrocorn. And note here, because the orchid root system isn't as big as prior, right? So I actually only potted this orchid, using maybe only about 2/3 of the container. I did not pot this orchid all the way up to the very top of the container. And that's the kinds of adjustment you can make depending on the orchid situation. And this time around, I decided to drill holes at the bottom so that this orchid is in a traditional setup. It's no longer semi-hydro, because it has drainage holes at the bottom, but I still use inorganic media. So these pebbles, I don't have to ever worrying about the pebbles getting old and breaking down like bark or sphagnum moss would. And here, after the repot, it started to put out new buds too. So like I said, this orchid is kind of free flowering. Whenever it's happy, it wants to flower. So for these additional flowers, I would definitely make another video to give you an update. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!